Chapter 12 Leader of Government Business. The day after my release from prison, I was invited by the governor to meet him at 9 o'clock that morning. When I walked into the courtyard of Christiansborg Castle, the official residence of the governor, I suddenly realized that it was the very first time I had set eyes on the place. The glaring white stone of the battlements, the impressive forecourt and the beauty of this imposing building with the roaring surf battering against its foundations seemed to me like a new world. Although Sir Charles Arden Clarke and I had been opposing each other for so many months past, I had no idea what he looked like, for we had never met. I wondered how I should be received. Had I known this man before, I should not have doubted the courtesy that would be shown to me. A tall, broad-shouldered man, sun-tanned, with an expression of firmness and discipline, but with a twinkle of kindness in his eyes, came towards me with his hand outstretched, a hand that I noticed was large and capable-looking. He welcomed me and asked me how I was. As we both sat down, I sensed that he must be feeling as alert and suspicious of me as I was of him. We lost little time, however, in coming down to the business on hand. I did my best to make it clear to him that I would be prepared at all times to place my cards face upwards on the table, because it was only by frankness that mutual trust and confidence could be established. He agreed with me wholeheartedly on this, and I sensed immediately that he spoke with sincerity. He was, I thought, a man with a strong sense of justice and fair play, with whom I could easily be friends even though I looked upon him as a symbol of British imperialism in the country. In spite of the fact that I was fresh from the prison cell and had probably every reason to harbour hatred in my heart, I had forced myself to forget the sufferings and degradation that I had endured at the hands of the colonial administration, for I knew that revenge was bitter and foreign to my makeup. It was with truth and sincerity that I made the statement soon after my release from gaol that I had come out of gaol and into the assembly without the slightest feeling of bitterness to Britain. I stand for no discrimination against any race or individual, but I am unalterably opposed to imperialism in any form. I left the castle with instructions from the governor to form a government. As I walked down the steps, it was as if the whole thing had been a dream, that I was stepping down from the clouds, and that I would soon wake up and find myself squatting on the prison floor, eating a bowl of maize porridge. I must say a word or two here about the constitution existing at this time. Contrary to the provisions of the Burns Constitution, that of the Coucy Constitution recommended that a new legislative assembly was to consist of a speaker to be elected by the assembly from among its members or outside of it, and 84 elected members. 5 seats were allocated to the municipalities, 2 for Accra, 1 each for Cape Coast, Sekondi Takoradi, and Kumasi. 33 rural members were to be elected in 2 stages, first by direct primary voting and secondly through electoral colleges. 19 inhabitants of the Northern Territories were to be elected by the territorial councils of the Colony, Ashanti, and Transvolta/Togoland. 6 special members were to be elected in equal proportion by the Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Mines, and 3 ex officio members were to be nominated by the governor. They were the Minister of Defense and External Affairs, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Justice. The result of the election showed that the Convention People's Party had won 34 out of a possible 38 elected seats in the municipal and rural areas, and that they also had a majority in the assembly over the nominated candidates. Immediately I left the castle, I convened a meeting of the Central Committee of the party in order to discuss with them the names of those that I had selected to serve as ministers in the new government. The problem which faced me was that during my discussions with the governor, I had agreed that since the CPP had won a majority only in the elected seats of the assembly, to select my ministers solely from the ranks of the party, might bring me into conflict with the territorial members and with other independent members of the Assembly. I propose to the Central Committee, therefore, that of the 7 members, 5 should be party members, 1 should come from the Northern Territories, and the other 1 should come from Ashanti. At first, the Central Committee objected to this proposal, as they felt, and understandably so, that all the ministers should be chosen from the ranks of party supporters. After a long discussion, however, they accepted my suggestion, and I then submitted the names to the governor. The 5 ministers belonging to my party were Kojo Botsio, Minister of Education and Social Welfare; K.A. Bedema, Minister of Health and Labour; A. Casely Hayford, Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources; T. Hutton Mills, Minister of Commerce, Industry and Mines; Dr. Ansa Koy, Minister of Communications and Works. I nominated as Minister of Local Government E.O. Asafu Ajay, as a representative of Ashanti, and finally, to represent the Northern Territories, I selected Kabachirura J.A. Brema as Minister without portfolio. Under the Constitution, as a leader of the majority party in the Assembly, I became the leader of government business. For the CPP to win a sweeping victory had been unexpected and must have been an unpleasant surprise for quite a number of people. The post of leader of government business, for instance, had been earmarked for the Attorney General, a post held by an overseas officer. Many other members of the Assembly who were opposed to the Convention People's Party were expecting ministerial appointments and had made extravagant preparations in anticipation of this, believing that if the governor was to nominate members to the Executive Council under the Kusi Constitution, they stood a fair chance of being selected. Because of this, new suits had been ordered to fit such offices, and wives had been dispatched to Europe to get themselves trained in the art of entertaining at a high level. But as things turned out, the victory of the CPP over the combined forces of its political opponents showered cold water on these plans. In order to acquaint the CPP assemblymen of the policy of the party and of the dangers and difficulties that lay ahead of them when they took their seats in the assembly, I arranged to address them at the arena. Because of the importance of this message, I had copies of it printed so that it would be a permanent record for them. In this address, I pointed out that the Convention People's Party, although alert to the dangers of trying to work under the existing constitution, was committed to pursue the struggle for full self-government now. Going to the assembly, I said, is not an end, but a means whereby self-government now can be fought for and won, both from within and from without the assembly. Our party was the only one in the country that had this aim, and therefore it would be impracticable for it to work with those who had different views. I explained that in a democratic society, if a political party was in the minority, it formed the opposition. If it was in the majority, then it formed the government. And as far as we were concerned, there should be no compromise on this point. Coalition with the other political groups in the country, such as we knew them, would be dangerous. The CPP, if it was to take part in forming the new government, would ask that all the 8 ministerial positions should be from party members, but a concession might be made for the inclusion of 1 or 2 territorial members in the Executive Council. I pointed out that the colonial government did not give self-government to the colonies until circumstances forced them to do so, and that it was only by determination, by singleness of purpose, and by effective and relentless agitation and organization that we could achieve our goal, and this regardless of victimizations, persecutions, and imprisonment. Members of the Assembly should not overlook the fact that the essential part of any proposal for democratic government consisted in a desire to create all the conditions, political, economic, social, and cultural, that are necessary to maintain a decent and full life for the people. I warned them also that there was one great risk attached to accepting office under the present constitution. The temptation to identify oneself with such a constitution and to be swayed by considerations of temporary personal advantage instead of seeking the interest of the people. Bribery and corruption, which had been part and parcel of the colonial setup, must be stamped out. Our election to the Assembly showed that the public had confidence in the integrity of the party. The trust with which the people had placed in the CPP was the most precious thing we possessed, and as long as we were able to maintain it, victory would be ours. The people of the country needed political power to manage their own affairs, but we should not be deceived by such things as the creation of African ministers under the new constitution, for these ministers could very easily become tools and puppets in the hands of the British colonial administrators. It was important, therefore, that the party system should be established forthwith in the new Legislative Assembly, so that ministers could be collectively responsible to the people whom they represented and not to civil servants. I also told them that it was important to remember at all times that as members of the Legislative Assembly we did not stand alone. As such, we were leaders of the mass of the people outside the assembly, and at all times we must be conscious of this link and avoid isolating ourselves from the people. We must keep contact with those who gave birth to and nurtured the party. This could be done by meetings and consultations with the people, and by putting forward the need of the people in the assembly. As long as the party preserved this link with the people, it had every chance of becoming invincible. Assemblymen should have foresight and be able to deal with matters effectively, but at the same time the policy of the party should be explained to the people whenever a new situation arose. An important thing that must be carried out, I went on, was to sweep away all colonial laws which restricted freedom of speech of the press and in public assembly. In particular, I quoted the need for amendments to the laws concerning trade unions, the law of sedition, and others which were aimed at hindering the progress of the people. Moreover, a citizen should be tried by a jury in all criminal cases instead of the questionable trial by assessors. It was felt that we had not accepted office by virtue of our majority in the assembly, but had embarked upon non-cooperation and remained in the opposition. We would merely have been pursuing a negative course of action. It was moreover the opinion of the party executive that by taking part in the new government we were at least preventing the stooges and reactionaries from taking advantage of the position. Governmental positions could also help us to obtain the initiative in the continuing struggle for full self-government. If we were obstructed in our purpose by British bureaucratic officialdom, we did not rule out the possibility of further positive action. There should be no fraternization, I said, between assemblymen and European officials except on strictly official relations. For what imperialists failed to achieve by strong-arm methods, they might hope to bring off with cocktail parties. I emphasized, however, that we were not fighting against race or color, but against a system. To prove that we had not led this struggle for any personal aggrandizement, we had agreed that none of our party members in the Executive Council should go to live in the palatial ministerial bungalows that had been built for the purpose. Moreover, I continued, until such time as full self-government had been attained, I was strongly of the opinion that all party members of the Assembly, as well as ministers, should surrender their salaries to the party and draw instead agreed remuneration from party funds. This would prevent careerism and induce those in high office to live simply and modestly and so to maintain contact with the common people. By launching positive action the previous year, we had demonstrated to the people that we stood by our word, whatever the cost might be. The spirit of positive action, I declared, has made the party what it is today, and positive action must maintain it. The die is cast, I concluded. The exploited and oppressed people of colonial Africa and elsewhere are looking up to us for hope and inspiration. Progressive people in Britain and elsewhere are also solidly behind us. The torch of the liberation movement has been lifted up in Ghana for the whole of West Africa, and it will blaze a trail of freedom for other oppressed territories. Long live the Convention People's Party. Long live the liberation movement throughout the world. The Legislative Assembly first met on the 20th of February 1951 for members to take the oath of allegiance and for the election of a speaker. Much to the amazement of the people, the speaker I proposed was in no way connected with our party and had never shown any interest in the policy of the CPP. This was Mr. E.C., now Sir Emmanuel, Quist, a distinguished barrister and former president of the Legislative Council. The nomination and that of Dr. Fiauru as deputy speaker was unanimously accepted. The assembly then adjourned until the 26th of February, when the election of ministers took place. Apart from my own nominations, the governor nominated as ex officio ministers Mr. R. H. Salloway as Minister of Defense and External Affairs, and Mr. R. Armitage as Minister of Finance, and Mr. P. Brannigan as Minister of Justice and Attorney General. All the representative ministers were accepted by secret ballot of the Assembly. The legislature began its work in earnest. The CPP representative ministers with the three ex officio ministers formed the Executive Council, which was presided over by the governor. Between the two were certain independents from the territorial councils, who did not come under the control of either whip, and voted according to their own conscience, sometimes for the government and sometimes for the opposition. Where am I? Sorry, I just lost it. Okay, but although my party had only 34 of the total of 74 seats in the assembly, we were usually able to secure enough support from the independents to give us a firm and reasonable majority to carry out our policy in legislation. During the early days of 1951, there was so much to be attended to that looking back, I wonder how I ever got through it all. First, there was the organizing and arranging of the work of the assembly, such as the procedure for bills, questions, preparation of standing orders, and the introduction of some method of accurately reporting the assembly proceedings. Then I planned the speaker's office. Coupled with this, owing to the unexpectedness of my appointment as leader of government business, no provision had been made for an office for me, for as things had gone according to plan, the position would have been in the hands of the Attorney General. I was given a room in the main ministry building near that of the Colonial Secretary and the services of a British Senior Assistant Secretary from the Ministry of Agriculture. Together we laid the foundations of my office. And then there was the party to consider. The party headquarters was filled to capacity each day with members coming to see me with urgent problems, personal matters, or just to shake my hand. And it was all important that I should be there to meet them. My daily program was an exhausting one. I used to get up at 4 in the morning to get into my study and spend a couple of hours in preparing my files, speeches, or other matters that had to be dealt with during the day. The people would start coming to the house, often long before I had finished my work, and I would spend another couple of hours talking with them and trying to sort out the 101 problems that they brought to place before me. If I had time, I would drink a cup of tea, but this was often allowed to get cold. I would arrive at the office around 8 o'clock and go through whatever there was on my desk. If the assembly was in session, I would go there and proceed later to the party headquarters. Otherwise, I would go straight to the headquarters and spend several hours there. I rarely had anything to eat in the middle of the day, and it was usually late afternoon when I got back to my house to eat whatever had been put on the table for me: fufu, kenke, stewed fish, or a rice dish. Sometimes I would scarcely have begun my meal before people arrived with more problems that they felt could not possibly wait 5 minutes. While I was about the business of eating, they sat and talked to me. The evenings were as busy as the days. Party meetings, interviews, people, and more people. It was rare that I got to bed before midnight and my hours of sleep averaged 4 per night. As time went on, the disgruntled members of the opposition, having got over the shock of having to forego their positions of high office in the new government, had started their old game of attacking me and my followers. They tried to cause discontent among the people and misunderstanding in the world press by announcing that because these flotsams and jetsams and popinjays of the country had landed themselves good jobs, they had forsaken their policy of self-government now. In order to defend this criticism, I issued them a challenge which I delivered in public before a large crowd in Prempeh Hall, Kumasi, at the beginning of October. After going through the history of the party and reiterating to the people that our policy was as strongly for self-government now as it had ever been, I warned the crowd against falling into the trap of the enemies of our party, who were now accusing me and the CPP of compromising with imperialists, of deserting our sacred cause and of signing secret pacts. We either go forward to victory or we pay the consequences of defeat, I said. What is wrong with these political charlatans and humbugs? I asked. It is time for them to make up their minds, and I am going to help them do so. What do they want of me? Let them come out and openly say it. If after having won the election so decisively, the Convention People's Party had not accepted ministerial positions, these same people would have said that we were afraid of responsibility and that it would not have been beneath them to do anything that would bring them into power. I reminded the people that the UGCC and some of the chiefs had accused us of rejecting the Kusi constitution, but that they had agreed at the Joint Territorial Congress in Kumasi that this constitution should be given a trial. Can it be, I asked, that they now want self-government immediately? Today? Are they prepared for positive action now? I wondered, I said, whether if a motion for immediate self-government, unanimously adopted by the Assembly, were rejected by the British government, these elements would join with us in staging another positive action. In this connection, I declared, I will now throw a challenge to the UGCC and all other political opponents. We of the Convention People's Party have made it plain that we are working according to plan, but we are nonetheless prepared to readjust our tactics and strategy if our detractors and opponents accept the challenge to join us in declaring positive action for self-government now. My colleagues and I are prepared to resign from the government immediately if the so-called sorry, I've lost it again. Yes, if the so-called opposition parties, factions, groups and caucuses come out of the conspirational dens and join me and my party in staging positive action for full self-government now. To implement this challenge, I continued, we invite Dr. Dankwa, Mr. Obetsubi Lamptey, and the executive of the United Gold Coast Convention, Mr. Olenu, Mr. Bosman, and the executive of the National Democratic Party, the chiefs of the Asante Council, Nana Ofori-Atta, president of the Joint Provincial Council, and chiefs of that council, Mr. Gabina Seki, and the executive of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, all of them to communicate with the General Secretary of the party within 14 days from today. The dateline being midnight on the 14th of December 1951, whether or not they are prepared to meet the representatives of the CPP in conference to plan a nationwide campaign of positive action if the British government rejects a motion for self-government now. I amplified the conditions upon which this united party would treat with the British government and ended by declaring that the people of the country would now be able to judge the mettle of our political opponents. Of course, not one of them answered my challenge, but the air was cleared once more.